were you thinking about, hey, we're gonna have to go raise a bunch of money? How am I gonna build this? Like, what was their initial concerns, like jumping off to do this?
Yeah, I think initially the concept made sense. We started working on it, right away. I'm really fortunate because we have great investors. But, if you don't have great investors, that could be a long road for them to say, hey, look, we need to have faith that you guys are working on the right things. And so initially, when you don't have any funding, you've quit your job, you start building this new product. You're in the very early phases of just trying to figure out, what's even going to be valuable to the customers. Yeah, I think you have a lot of challenges there where you're saying, hey, look, this is something where we have to have a very long-term vision on this, even on day one.
And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Ozan Unlu, who's the founder and CEO of Edge Delta, which is in the observability space. So if you've got a lot of servers, a lot of software, you got a lot of data, you figure out what the hell to do with that. His company helps do that. I actually was the founder of a similar sort of company in the space, so probably interesting conversation today. I do want to remind you guys, if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, you should go to startuphustlenews.com and sign up. We have 20,000 people on the newsletter. I get to email every single week. Also, we are publishing all these on YouTube. If you guys haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, you can check out our beautiful faces on YouTube. And the podcast is brought to you by Fullscale. If you're looking to hire software developers, check us out at fullscale.io. Front end, back end, mobile, QA, .NET, PHP, all the JavaScripts, all the things. Check us out at fullscale.io. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Matt. And I'm excited because not very often do I get a podcast host who, also has a tremendous amount of experience in the space. So, pretty excited for the conversation. Hopefully, we can get down into some dirty details, but also keep it relevant for most of the people listening.
Well, so I sold my first company in 2011, and I was, founder and CTO of a very, very fast-growing SaaS company. And when we sold it, I had about 40 software developers or something when I left, and very complex production environment, all the performance issues, scalability issues. We had all the problems. We had all of them. We were very, very, very high growth SaaS company. And when I started Stackify in 2012, my goal was like, okay, how do I give developers just more access to production without giving them production access, like the keys to the kingdom? How do I, collect the data we need so they can do their job? And so that's how I kind of got into it. And then eventually we collected all the logging data and we built an application performance, like monitoring product and all this stuff, which all this stuff is now kind of called observability, which is kind of the space you live in. We had another recent podcast guest from Honeycomb was on here too, Charity Majors, if you know her. She was really awesome. And it's a very interesting space. It's a very complex product set in space. So I guess tell us, how did you get into this space?
Yeah. So, I was early on my journey, I was a software developer at Microsoft. That was working on a lot of the monitoring systems. I started my career there on the server side. Then very quickly, after a few years, I guess that's very quick in Microsoft standards. I moved over to what was the early version of the Azure team. So there was a lot of cloud products at Microsoft even before Azure. And on the server side, some of those like business productivity online suite, for instance, was a very kind of unexciting, unsexy name for cloud services. But in the early days of Azure, AWS was already kind of off into the races and was really quite big compared to Azure. So it was exciting. It was a great time. We were kind of second in the great race for all the cloud business out there. Not necessarily the case anymore, right? I think AWS is still up there on top, but I think Azure is doing some interesting things, as is GCP. But for me, even though I was a developer and then eventually ended up going to the security side at Microsoft, I had a lot of soft skill sets that I wasn't utilizing. And I had some great mentors in my career and in my life. And, they approached me and said, look, Ozan, you're a good developer. You're even an above average developer, but you're not a superstar and you're never going to be a superstar. And it didn't break my heart. Instead, it actually just pushed me to, I think, something that was a lot better fit for all my various different skill sets, which was to be a technical resource, but to work day in, day out with, customers on all their various different technical needs and projects and initiatives.
Because you can speak both languages, right? Like that's the key, is you can speak both languages. You can talk to the developers, and most developers don't really speak English. And I don't mean like English, like they just don't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And then talking to customers and who also don't make any sense because they can't even tell you really what they want. They just tell you like what their problems are. They don't know how to solve any of them. And you have to figure out how to speak both sides of this.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the things that was really interesting was, at Microsoft, you focus on a very, very specific technical area. I mean, the company's so big, right? You focus on a very specific technical area and you get really deep in that area. That's exciting in that you usually end up knowing that area better than anyone else in the world. But it's also challenging because, potentially 95% of what you learn doesn't really translate to any other job, right? Because it's so specific to that area.
Yeah.
Then when I moved into being a solution architect at Sumo Logic is what I ended up joining, which is another observability vendor, early stage. This was over 10 years ago, but it was effectively the first multi-tenant cloud-based solution in observability. Joining that, you get so much more breadth than you got before. Sure, I'm not going to focus, 80 straight hours without going to sleep and without eating and just, drinking Soylent and focusing on a specific problem for a specific customer. But you do get a lot more breadth. You do get a lot more understanding and, frankly, context in the industry. So now you understand, hey, in the last 3 months, I've met with 100 different potential customers and prospects. And I've seen for 100 different companies how they're trying to solve the same similar challenges and problems. And you just get so much more context and so much more breadth, even though maybe you don't have the very low level technical experience anymore.
So you went from developer to solution architect, kind of working on the sales side, working at Sumo Logic. What gave you the idea for Edge Delta? When did you wake up one day and you're like, hey, I should go start my own company and leave Sumo Logic?
Yeah, I think, the transition from being a developer to a solution architect was great. I also kind of completed my transition to the dark side by going from solution architect to bag carrying sales rep, right? So, that was a very interesting experience. And for me, a lot of salespeople will use the term coin operated, right? And it's not even like a put down. It's like, hey, look, I'm coin operated. You pay me. I go get revenue. Yeah. And this is a relationship that is, symbiotic and we're all honest and in agreement about what this relationship is, right? For me, I didn't really think about it that way. And I think it's nothing against people that do think about it that way. For me, it was always very curious in solving big technical problems. And if a byproduct of that happened to be that I sold a lot of product and made a lot of revenue and therefore commissions, that was great. But I think my customers understood that. They understood that I was really out there trying to solve these big technical challenges. That in turn led me to any type of big serious deal that I closed with a customer, I would go literally get badged. So I go get badged as a vendor at their company, and I would go try to be on site once a week. And I think my unique experience of being an ex-developer who then went solution architect and went salesperson, showing up once a week and really working with the customers on deep technical challenges, kind of in the front trenches, that unique combination allowed me to see some gaps in the market for what no technology or no tool was able to do, as of 5 years ago. So that was kind of the nexus, the creation of Edge Delta, where it was a very unique challenge, a very unique problem set, and there wasn't really any technology out there that was able to accomplish and meet those needs for the customers.
So what was so unique about the problem?
I think, if you think about 30 years ago, this concept of like a data store, data warehouse, a database on the back end where you're centralizing all the data. Some people talk about, hey, it's store and explore. Some people talk about, hey, it's, centralize and analyze, right? There's a lot of terms for that, but effectively it's this concept that you're going to take all the data, put it into a bucket, and then you're going to search that bucket. And when you're searching that bucket, you can do things like literally log search or some sort of string matching. You can also do dashboarding, so you can see your various different logs and metrics on a dashboard to be able to kind of that single pane of glass that everyone talks about. You can also do things like alert or trigger actions based off of that. And so that all typically was done, let's say 15 years ago, in this backend central data store. And then things about 10 years ago started changing, and things like, Kinesis, Kafka, these stream processing layers, they started to get very, very popular, right? And so now there was this concept of like, oh, well, if you're waiting for all that data to be indexed in a data store first, it's way too slow. So we got this new thing for you. You can just basically have some logic, and you can, basically keep some sort of state in Kafka or in Kinesis in this stream processing layer. And that will be a lot faster. You won't have to wait for that data to be indexed. And frankly, maybe you don't even need to index all this data on the back end, right? So that was kind of about 10 years ago, starting to get very popular and much more widely adopted. And then we look at Edge Delta as kind of the third piece of that puzzle, which is you have your backend data store, you have your central stream processing, and then you also need distributed stream processing or edge stream processing. And that's the concept of Edge Delta, which is, hey, how do we start looking at data as it's being created as close to the source of that data as possible? And how do we start to pre-process, pre-aggregate, and frankly have machine learning and some even basic AI running on the edge to be able to understand what are the high-value data sets, what are the low-value data sets, et cetera. And there just really wasn't that solution in the space before Edge Delta.
Well, so this is primarily a problem for really, really large companies, right? If you have hundreds of servers, every one of those servers is potentially producing like gigabytes of data an hour, or definitely in a day. And that's a lot of data to all send one place. Like you're saying, I guess send all this data across all these different servers, all these different applications, send it to one place. And then that one place just chokes and dies because it's just too much data to deal with, right? At some scale, like you just can't deal with it. And so the problem that you guys were aiming to solve is like, okay, as close to the edge as possible, how do we figure out what of that data is valuable and not valuable? How do we get rid of that data, or how do we route it to different places? Like were those the problems you were trying to solve?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if we go back to, when I first started at Sumo Logic over 10 years ago, the average customer had, to your point, maybe 5 or 10 or 20 gigabytes of data they were creating a day across all of their different services.
Yeah.
And in that case, of course, there's a huge benefit to centralizing all that data in, a big backend that's cloud-based. So that concept makes a ton of sense. I think today when people are looking at how do I set up observability, of course, the large enterprises that have a ton of data, and some of our customers do, petabytes and petabytes of data they create every single day, right? And so at that scale, of course, you do have to think about, okay, I do need to.
You can't really keep all that data.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to have a next generation architecture in order to do it, and you have to figure out what is this data that I should be, tiering into a very expensive performant index, and what's this, tier of data that I should be putting into a very kind of low cost optimized, long-term retention and storage and archive tier. And so, that concept exists. I think the exciting part is, even if you're a small startup, you do want to implement your observability stack in a sustainable manner, right? So you don't want to go create effectively a dependency on this old school way of doing it, which is, hey, let's centralize and analyze. That might work for the first couple of weeks or the first few months, but you also don't want to be incurring tech debt. So to really set it up in a much more modern architecture, that's what we try to solve for both, obviously large enterprise that create petabytes of data a day, but also those startups that are striving to be that large enterprise one day.
So help me understand. So do you guys provide a full like APM, log management, observability platform, or do you just provide the tooling to kind of help forward that to all these other vendors that do that stuff? Or both?
That's a great question. So our initial product was observability and data pipelines. And what that really means is, hey, we understand that you're using Datadog, Splunk, New Relic, Elastic, Sumo Logic, any of one of the platforms. We understand that you need the ability to be able to pre-process, route, filter, pre-aggregate, all sorts of different things to transform that data, and then eventually route it to the optimal downstream destinations. That was our initial product. And frankly, in the market, we do believe we have the most flexible and the most scalable and frankly most advanced and dynamic way that any organization can do that today. So we're really proud of what we built, and I think we have a lot of happy customers that you can go to our website and look at the logos and look at the quotes from customers there. But yeah, that was our initial product. And then what we did is we actually had customers coming to us and saying, hey, we love your pipelines product. And, our Splunk renewal is coming up in 6 months. And they would ask us. They'd say, "Hey, look, you guys are our trusted advisor. Should we renew Splunk?" And we'd say, "Okay, well, let's go take a look. Like, how are you even using Splunk?"
Yeah.
And most of the time, sure, there's going to be the advanced users, the top 5% that are doing all the crazy, correlation, common information models, the joins, the threat feeds, the lookups, the every single very advanced corner case. But more often than not, you had a customer that said, "Yeah, we use these dashboards," and they would try to load the dashboard and it wouldn't load because it was either too much data or the query was out of date. Or they would just say, "Hey, look, we realistically, we're just searching for certain logs. We're searching for a certain session or an ID token or something like that." And it's pretty basic. And so they said, "Look, you guys have done such a phenomenal job with observability and data pipelines. Could you guys do log search?" And that was, years and years and years ago. And that was really our first step into observability, was providing that basis for, hey, we have pipelines. That gives you a really good tier to allow you to have full control and understanding and ownership of what happens to your data sets downstream. But also, if you don't need every single feature in Datadog or Splunk, and frankly, you don't want to incur that cost per unit cost of data, we had a very great alternative from an observability standpoint as well.
Would you say you now effectively do compete head to head with Loggly and Splunk and all these different log management tools? But you're saying you don't provide every single feature they do, but you provide the 80% that people care about.
Yeah, I would say we provide the 80% that people care about, but also, if we don't provide the other 20% that Datadog does, we also have our own, let's say, 20% that they don't provide, right? So I think it's also, as times are changing and as things are getting more modern, we focus on and prioritize the features that people actually do use, as well as focus and prioritize, features in the future that people are going to need. I think you mentioned, giving developers access to production from your own startup many years ago. And in many ways, also, there's the flip side to that, right? It's also giving the platform team or giving the DevOps engineer or giving the SRE access to be able to understand what the root cause of something might be, right? I think, I think everyone aspires to be more than just the person that says, "Hey, I wake up in the middle of the night and then I go, ping the developer team to say, hey, something happened," whether I roll it back or I go get them to go hot fix it or patch it, in real time. I think they want to have more context. They want to be able to provide more value than just, "Hey, the metric is up and the error rate is up, go figure it out and fix it." I think people want to be a lot more advanced in that. And I think the things that we're providing, much more than a Splunk or Datadog, allow that person to be a lot more educated and a lot more aware of what's going on, full stack within the environment.
So let me ask you this, though, because at one point in time, if you were focused on being a data pipeline to New Relic, Datadog, Splunk, all these different people, you potentially were a great partner for them, right? Like Datadog might refer you customers and be like, "Hey, you guys have too much data. You need to filter this crap. You need to do this. You need to do that. Use Edge Delta. They will help you do that." Now, all of a sudden, they probably aren't going to refer customers to you anymore, right? Because now they see you as more of a competitor. So I'm just curious, how did you think about that? Like, hey, are they a partner or now we're a competitor? Did you think through like how to navigate that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that at any point, even if you're just pipelines, I don't think the Datadogs or the Splunks of the world are really excited to be your partner, right? I think
they were never a partner.
I mean, I think they're begrudgingly saying, "Hey, look, this is the lesser of two evils." Like, if I'm Datadog, it's like I'd rather have Datadog plus Edge Delta and retain the customer than have Splunk plus Edge Delta and lose the customer entirely.
Right.
I think that's a reality. But I don't ever think that whether it's Splunk or Datadog or anyone else, they are very excited for the concept, even if it's best for the customer. Now, I think like some of the hyperscalers...
They never were originally? When you first built the product, they were never partners for...
Nah, of course, we always had conversations. We want to make sure our platforms work well together. But I wouldn't say there was any type of significant partnership there. If you look at the hyperscalers, I think they're a little bit better about this, frankly. If you look at whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP, they do have this concept of, hey, we need to do what's best for the customer in the long term. I think, obviously when you get to that scale where you're a $3 trillion company, I think you can have that approach. I think, for the observability vendors, I don't think any of us are at that scale. So,
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit harder to have such a long-term focus. But that's what we try to do at Edge Delta, right? Which is, hey, we want to go implement and go build the next generation observability platform that's right for our customers in the long term, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more revenue for us tomorrow. Our approach is not to go be the highest revenue company tomorrow. It's to be the best platform for our customers in the long term.
Well, very, very cool. If you need help building software, I want to take a minute to remind you that you can check us out at Fullscale. We have over 300 software developers in the Philippines, help all sorts of different startups, tech companies building software. Check us out at fullscale.io. So I love the story of being at Sumo Logic, and it sounds like you're talking to a lot of customers every day, and probably a lot of them are expressing to you in different ways. Like, we have this problem, we have too much data, we don't know what to do with this data, it costs too much. And that ultimately is what led you to the idea of doing this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think,
so
it's
then
an exciting time to be in this space because you're getting a lot of things that are all kind of contributing to the perfect storm, right? You have a lot of these changes in architectures moving to microservices,
containers,
moving to
serverless,
containerization, Kubernetes.
Yeah,
you're getting serverless. Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, you're getting this monumental growth of data. And then, especially now, it's no secret, it's been a tough last couple of years in tech, right? Where all of a sudden interest rates skyrocket and all the cascading effects. And you have organizations that are trying to do more with less, whether it's less budget or it's less headcount, or frankly, it's just less heavy lifting. So that's the other part of Edge Delta as well that we focus on is how do we make this effortless for the customer? How do we make it feel sustainable where you don't feel like you're implementing something and then it's going to be the constant effort and overhead and management cost to keep the platform and the stack up and running.
Well,
yeah.
So here's my question for you. You leave Sumo Logic and you go to start this company. I'm curious, what was your first concern or thought going to do this, knowing like, hey, we're gonna have to go sell this to enterprise accounts, right? This is gonna be an enterprise product. How are we gonna build this thing? How are we gonna sell it to them? Were you thinking about, hey, we're gonna have to go raise a bunch of money? How am I gonna build this? Like, what was their initial concerns, like jumping off to do this?
Yeah, I think initially the concept made sense. We started working on it, right away. But the challenge ends up being that you look at, like, for instance, there's deep tech and there's enterprise. The biggest challenge to me was understanding that we are both a deep tech and enterprise company, right? You have the traditional enterprise sales cycles, but you're also, building a lot of very, very technical things, some of which are more advanced than anything that's ever been built before in the space. And so, the combination of those two, I'm really fortunate because we have great investors. But, if you don't have great investors, that could be a long road for them to say, hey, look, we need to have faith that you guys are working on the right things. And so initially, when you don't have any funding, you've quit your job, you start building this new product, you're in the very early phases of just trying to figure out, what's even going to be valuable to the customers. Yeah, I think you have a lot of challenges there where you're saying, hey, look, this is something where we have to have a very long-term vision on this, even on day one. And so that was probably the most challenging thing early.
So were you guys able to go raise capital fairly early based on the concept? Like, people said, hey, this guy's from Sumo Logic, he's got the right pedigree, he understands the space, we're going to make a big bet? Or was it like really difficult to sell the idea?
I think much like many early stage startups looking for their pre-seed or their seed round, I think it's always a progression. You're always having, conversations. I think for us, it took a little over 6 months to really get someone to lean in and say, hey, I'm on board for this. Raising your initial round of funding is kind of this funny thing where it's really a race to credibility.
Right.
Like, investors are looking at a few different things. They're looking at, how big's the market? Who
and
are
it was
these
a new
people,
market, right? Like, were there no competitors at the time?
I think you can look at it as a tangential market to full-on observability, right? Which is like, hey, observability pipelines, what portion of observability market do you think that's the total addressable market? But, I think for a potential investor, they're looking at, what's the market? Who's the team, right? Who are these people that are making these claims? And then finally, what's the idea? So I think And I think actually, probably in a slightly different order, in that the team is probably the number one thing, because you can always change the tangential market you're going into or change what the product is, but the team is much harder to change while still kind of keeping a startup up and running.
But were you guys able to build the product before raising the capital, or was it like, hey, we're going to have to raise capital because this is just too complicated to even build?
Well, so that's why I had to approach Fatih, and I had to say, hey, you need to help me with building the product. So I did build the initial first version of the product, and it was nothing like what it is today.
Yeah.
I think you can raise money. For us, we had the first version of the product. We had a demo. I kind of laugh when I look back at our first demo. It was literally like two laptops sitting next to each other and showing pipelines and the downstream effects, so that I wouldn't have to deal with audio and AV and audio and visual when I was going into conference rooms. But yeah, we did build the first version of the product. I would say probably no part of that product exists in that state today and survived. But
so how long did it take you to build like the first version? Wait, let me rephrase that. How long did it take you from inception to get to the first paying customer?
Gosh, first paying customer. So let me walk you through that journey. First, you have your design partners. You have people that trust you, and whether you knew them before, they talk to you and they say, okay, this is an interesting concept. This is a real problem for us, and they try it out. I think from quitting my day job and starting Edge Delta to our first paying customer, it must have been something around like 18 months.
Okay. Not bad.
Yeah, not great, but the space that we're in, where it's both DTIP and enterprise, for us, we also wanted to ensure that we were in a really good use case, right? We also wanted early customers that we wanted to build into. We wanted to further in that use case. We wanted to help them solve those problems.
But so the reason this is so complicated is you mentioned like the deep tech part of this, where it could take you longer to build the product because the product's very complicated. This isn't some like cute little web app thing. Like there's a lot of complex moving pieces behind the scenes. But it's also an enterprise sales. Like when you go to sell a new account today, is that a 3-month, 6-month, 12-month engagement? Like what does that sales cycle look like?
I think if I look at our stats, I think the average is something that lands right around the 5 or 6 month mark.
5 or 6 months.
So, I think probably, whether it's a few weeks or a couple of months is usually the evaluation. So let's say at an enterprise, you're dealing with 4 different teams who all want to try it out for 1 or 2 weeks each, and then you have
everybody's got to say yes.
Yep, and then you have the legal and procurement and all that fun process that everyone likes to go through. So yeah, I would say for the most part, it's usually in that 5 to 6 range.
And that makes it so hard, especially in your early phases. You're like, we just need a couple of customers to prove we can do this and grow this and scale this. And it's like you keep fighting. It's like months and months go by, right? It's like feels like you're on the treadmill just trying to get a few customers landed. Because I'm going to guess your average customer pays tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for a product like this. Like this is not a $100 a month product that people usually sign up for. I'm sure you have some startups that do, but most of your enterprise accounts are huge, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think also going back to, I get asked a lot, right? Which is, hey, if I was going to go do a startup, what area or what should I focus on? And I think that's actually the wrong way to think about it. I think you have to understand what is something that you know better than anyone else out there.
Yeah.
And what is some insight, some unique insight and idea that you have due to your extreme expertise in the space and your years and years experience. And for me, if I didn't have that, if I hadn't been in the space for close to 20 years and understood what the other solutions were in the market and understood what the gaps were that nobody else was doing, to your point, Matt, I don't know that I would have had the conviction to keep focusing on something where you can keep building a product for years and years and years, and there still feels like there's years and years and years of things that you could do. So to your point, it's not a fun little web app or widget. It is something that's pretty serious for enterprises, and frankly, it's the foundation that a lot of enterprises use to go build their observability practice on.
So I actually wrote in my newsletter on this topic that you're mentioning about, as a founder, why are you the right person to start this company? Like there should be some intangible reason, like you are the reason that this company is going to succeed versus any other random person off the street who would be doing the same thing. Like there's got to be some reason you're the right person. And so if you're not subscribed to my newsletter, startuphustlenews.com. Go subscribe. And you're right. Like, so your experience from Sumo Logic and all this stuff, it was really helpful. I'm curious, did your industry connections at Sumo Logic help you from a sales perspective? A couple years into this, you got the product off the ground. Were you able to call back on some of those previous clients and connections? Was that really helpful?
I think I was naive. I think I thought it was going to be a lot more helpful than it was. I think also, I consider myself an expert in the space, and I thought, hey, maybe my fallback will be I'll just, sell myself as services and really try to help. I think I was pretty naive. I think at the end of the day, yes, people want to see you succeed, but nobody's going to give you a contract or any
nobody
type
really
of business.
cares.
I mean, look, no one's going to give you any type of bone that they're going to throw your way. It's really going to have to come down to, are you actually solving problems for them? Yeah. And frankly, does that result in value for their business, right? So yeah, I think I was pretty naive. I think I thought it was going to be a little bit easier than it was, but I think it just makes it that much more fulfilling when you do get those paying customers who are saying, hey, we need your product and we rely on it.
Did it at least help open some doors?
I think probably the most valuable thing was understanding the process that you needed to go down to ask for those doors to open, right?
Okay.
You have to understand, hey, I have to outbound someone. Let's say the person doesn't know who I am. You have to very efficiently start understanding this constant kind of discovery process, right? Understanding what are the platforms they're using, what are the challenges with those platforms, how do we have a potential good fit, how am I going to claw some of the valuable time from this person and their team to even go evaluate our product to see if it's a good fit. All of these things, I think that experience was probably a lot more useful than just simply what's affectionately, I think, talked about as a Rolodex, right? I think from the early days. And so, I don't necessarily think that my Rolodex was nearly as valuable as the process and understanding how hard it is to go ask someone to go start giving you weeks and weeks of time from their team. That's a big give. So you have to have something that's really pretty juicy for them to be interested.
Well, tell us some more about the size and scope of your company now. You guys have been doing this for a year. Sounds like you've had a lot of success. You've raised $82 million, which is an insane amount of money. I'm not even sure what you do with $82 million. Tell us about how you guys have grown and experience from that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of long-term bets we're making. Obviously, we are one of the leaders in the space for AI and observability. So that is really, how do we start making it even more effortless, even more automated for our customers? We're just under about 100 people today. We do have a number of very large enterprise customers. I never like to throw out any logos because, obviously you can go to our website and look at the various logos on the website. But effectively, that's where we are, and we keep doubling down on being the most automated observability platform out there. Interestingly enough, there is this concept of LLMs. And in the last 18 months, LLMs have gotten very popular, obviously with the release of ChatGPT and others. Now, I think the challenge is people don't realize how expensive LLMs are when you're thinking about things on the order of megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes and petabytes, right? And so, we mentioned Datadog from before or Splunk from before. If you had to say, wow, I didn't realize that ChatGPT per unit cost is 3,000 times more expensive than Datadog, that would kind of blow your mind, right? Obviously, nobody wants to put in petabytes of data into ChatGPT, but at the same time, you have these solutions that provide value, and yet you have a huge separation for the value they can provide and the amount of data volumes that are created in observability. So that is a huge problem that I would say that we're at the forefront and we're innovating within that space.
Well, speaking of that, at Stackify, the biggest problem we had was cost. Our hosting costs were stupid expensive. And for example, on your website, it says your standard pricing is 20 cents per gigabyte. And I'm sitting here scratching my head. I'm like, I don't know how they make any money because SSD storage at Azure, for example, is 10 cents a gigabyte. How do you guys make any money hosting all this data, right? Yeah. That has to be a big challenge. The hosting cost.
And when you look at, a SaaS business, right, we should be shooting for 85, 90% margins.
Yeah.
And so, I think you do have to be creative in how you do it, right? So For instance, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to store, to your example, I'm going to store all of my data on SSD, then yeah, it's going to be really hard to go try to figure out. But even let's remove Edge Delta, right? Even if you're a large enterprise, and let's say you wanted to do this on your own, you'd still be nuts to store all your data on SSD. So what we're seeing in the market typically with customers is this concept of data tiering, this concept of saying, hey, maybe some things are stored on SSD or some things are stored on HDFS, maybe some things are pushed through Kafka, maybe some things are stored only in S3 buckets. So this concept of data tiering and really looking at a dynamic next generation architecture for observability, that is really where you can start to get the price point much lower. And I think one of our customers, Fama, there's a direct quote from their CTO, great quote. I think at the end of it, they were moving off of Datadog and they were saying, era of observability vendors overcharging per data point is over. So I love that quote. I think when you start to implement next generation technologies or next generation way of doing things, I think that price point needs to come down, much like it does for everything else, right? The price of storage, the price of compute, all that's coming down, and you do need to implement. Yeah, you do need to implement these next generation architectures that allows you to bring that price point down for your customers as well.
Well, I think part of the reason you have to raise $82 million is to pay for all that storage.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of it, right? It's definitely a small portion of the cost.
Or you guys invented the way to make storage like nearly free, and that's the key invention behind the scenes because it's so expensive. Like at Stackify, man, like our hosting cost was still probably 30% or something like that, like of our revenue. It was so expensive, and there's got to be a lot of wizardry and magic behind the scenes, I'm sure, that you guys have to do. It's like, how do we optimize all of this? Because you're a data company. Like the amount of data, the reason I bring this up is people just don't realize at scale, if you're dealing with petabytes of data, the cost of the data is absurdity. I mean, it's millions of dollars a month probably for a company like you guys. So it's insane.
Yeah, I did this blog post. I should say LinkedIn post. I think it was last week. And it was actually trying to use an analogy here. And, I think nobody sits there and says Datadog is cheap or Splunk is cheap, right? Everyone's complaining and saying, hey, those platforms are super, super expensive. Now, I think we've all heard the concept of, well, if you just stop drinking lattes and eating avocado toast, you'd be in a much better financial position. So I actually used that analogy. And I said, okay, well, if Datadog is the $6 latte, per unit cost of data, ChatGPT is a $19,000 latte.
Yeah.
And Edge Delta is the, 50-cent latte, whatever the number ends up being. So I think that's a good way to think about it. If you do an analogy, it's okay, a $6 latte every single day might be a little bit expensive. $19,000 latte is so unfeasible, it's not even funny. And then, of course, the 50-cent latte would be anyone's dream.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. This has been awesome. I do want to say a big congrats to being CEO of the year. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that come about?
Yeah, so that was, GeekWire, great publication here in the Northwest. They focus a lot on companies that were started and founded here in the Seattle area. And frankly, they were the first ones that put us on the map. So this was, about 5 years ago. They covered our seed round the first time we got funded.
Okay.
We had, great investors that they covered the initial investment. And then from there, we have a decent relationship, and it's budding, and I really appreciate everything that they do. And then they, I think, host these awards every year. And so, I was nominated and was fortunate enough to win. And I think also it's a testament to all the hard work from my team, right?
100%.
I'm not going to be winning that award at all if my team isn't hustling for years and years and years on end. So I'm just really fortunate to be able to work day in, day out with all the rest of the team and, everyone that gets to work with me every day, and I get to work with them. So very fortunate for that team, and I think, that award is a testament to that.
Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Again, this was Ozan Unlu, founder and CEO of Edge Delta. If you've got a lot of servers and a lot of data, you definitely need to check out their product. If you need to hire software developers, check us out at fullscale.io. Do you have any other final words of wisdom for other entrepreneurs out there as we round out the show today?
No, I mean, I would just say I probably get asked quite a bit, should I do this? And I think that's the wrong question. I think, if you feel like you should be doing it and you have this itch and this urge, I would just say go do it. I think there's no better time than now right now to go raise a seed round. I think the standards for a Series A or Series B are quite high right now. But, if you want to go start your dream and go start building it, it is a good time. And there's a lot of potential investors out there in the seed stage right now.
Never been a better time for availability of talent, right? Like so much tech talent out there that has gotten laid off or is maybe underemployed or worried about getting fired or whatever. There's a lot of people running around out there. There's a lot of talent, I'm sure. It's like, it'd be a good time to hire some good people, start something.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, you don't get to hire a ton of people at the beginning, but getting your core team, it'll be easier to do that as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Matt.